Thank you very much. We'll now go to my very good friend, the ranking member of the Full Appropriations Committee, Ms. DeLauro. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I say thank you to you, to Ranking Member McGovern, and to the members of the Rules Committee. Considering the escalating crises around the world, we are called upon to respond to in Ukraine, in Israel, in the Indo-Pacific, here at home, and on our border. I expected we would be here to discuss a bill that adequately responds to each of these needs without delay. Unfortunately, the bill under consideration does no such thing. To the extent it addresses the war in Israel, this bill is totally without the humanitarian aid for innocent civilians caught in the crossfire that must be included in any emergency spending measure. I have called for a humanitarian pause in the fighting to allow for the restoration of power and water in the region and the rapid, safe, and uninterrupted distribution of humanitarian aid. I have also urged the unconditional release of all remaining hostages. We must do everything that we can to protect innocent life. This bill uses a crisis of inconceivable consequence as a cover for a tax cut for billionaires and the wealthiest corporations. The images we have seen of Israelis attacked by Hamas terrorists are harrowing and harken back to the darkest days of the 20th century. This is the Holocaust. It's a different kind of massacre. The costs of Hamas's rule in Gaza to Israelis and to Palestinians are intolerable and beyond the point of no return. We can and we must provide Israel with the resources it needs to defend itself from terrorist attacks and to crush Hamas. This is precisely why we should be moving legislation that has the best chance of passing this body, gaining approval in the Senate, and moving across the president's desk in the timeliest manner possible. Instead, House Republicans have proposed a bill that will only delay providing critical support to Israel. It is outrageous that a major emergency funding bill in response to the worst attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust is tied to offsets. Israel, our closest ally in the Middle East, is reeling from a terrorist attack and urgently needs our support. 1,400 Israelis, 36 Americans were killed in their homes and on the streets in cold blood. Israel needs to know why we are conditioning aid in this time of need. And why are we conditioning aid to Israel for the very, very first time? This bill tells our allies that should they find themselves in an existential war for their democracy and freedom, the United States cannot be counted on for support. This bill tells innocent civilians caught in the crossfire that we cannot care for their safety or their national security. This bill tells America's border communities that you cannot count on us for your security or for support. This bill tells the American people that if we are to support those fighting for democracy and against naked aggression abroad, we do not have their backs. You endanger our national security. This bill tells our brave firefighters that risk to their lives to keep us safe from wildfires that we do not care if their pay gets cut. And shamefully, by cutting the IRS by $14.3 billion, which CBO, I might add, says has the effect of nearly doubling the cost of this bill, with $27 billion in lost revenue, $12.5 billion added to the deficit. And I know from being in this room many times over many hours how my colleagues on the other side of the aisle concern themselves with the deficit. This bill tells billionaires and the wealthiest corporations that in the eyes of House Republicans, they come first. This bill says that they can come before our closest allies abroad, they come before fighting for freedom against Russia, and they come before helping the people of Maui recover from the wildfires, Guam from the typhoon, Florida and the southeastern United States from hurricanes, California and Vermont from floods, and Mississippi from tornadoes. Americans are struggling to recover from natural disasters, and House Republicans are telling them to get in line behind the billionaires. These messages are the antithesis of what we should be telling the world this moment. As a first bill under the new Speaker, this is not a serious bill. It remains painfully partisan when the world asks so much more of America. Russian tyranny and aggression threaten more than just Ukraine's borders. We learned that in Georgia. We learned it in the Crimea. If you stand by while Russia takes an inch, they will take a mile. Vladimir Putin must be held to account for upending Europe's security and peacetime for a pointless and a bloody war which has disrupted energy markets and triggered food insecurity around the world. Ukraine's fight for democracy and sovereignty requires decisive action and absolute support from the free world. We must act like the leaders of the free world. This is appeasement, like the world experienced in 1938, which led to a cascading murderous assault. As Winston Churchill pointed out at that time, and I quote, "An appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile, hoping it will eat him last." Meanwhile, we must project strength in the Indo-Pacific as China seeks to undermine and overpower the region's democratic strongholds. Curtailing China's influence in the region is in the direct interest of the American national security, yet it is nowhere to be found in the House Republicans' legislation. And finally, we must prove, as we did during the years after World War II and throughout the Cold War, that we can protect, we can defend, and we can nurture global democracy as the preeminent form of governance at the same time we serve the American people. This has never been a question of either or, and we should reject that dichotomy altogether. Something as simple and universally beneficial as supporting child care, lessening the burden on families and caretakers, should be in whatever legislative vehicle can move immediately. As it's clear to any lawmaker interested in governing any government funding bill, whether an emergency supplemental or a full-year appropriations bill, will need the support of Democrats and Republicans in both the House and the Senate to become law. House Republicans know this legislation will not become law. The president will not sign it. House Democrats are ready to work with House Republicans on legislation that supports our allies abroad, including Israel and Ukraine, protects our national security, provides humanitarian assistance, and makes much-needed domestic investments. But House Republicans so far refuse to join us at the negotiating table. 3 weeks were squandered by partisan infighting. Our allies and the American people have no more time to wait. We must act now to defend our allies, to protect civilians, and to serve the American people's urgent needs. This bill does none of the above. So I urge my colleagues to withhold their support. I thank you, and I yield back.